Hey y'all, it's Ashley at Bookishrealm and I'm back with another video. Sorry, I'm trying to sit here and get myself together, like, know what I got going on. Pants not all right, shirt all twisted and jacked up. Hey y'all, thank you for coming here, clicking on this video. If you're new here, if you've already been here before, welcome back. So you can see from the title of this video, today we're here to talk about 10 books that I think deserve more love from Booktube. Now this originally was a Patreon book or video pick for the month of December. So I'm kind of altering it a little bit because we had a tie between two videos. So I'm going to be working on this one and another one kind of at the same time. So this was originally going to be like 20 books that don't get enough hype from Booktube, but I changed it a little bit into 10 books that deserve a little bit more love, and they really don't get enough hype. So definitely think that these books should be appreciated just a tad bit more. What you're going to find in terms of trends here is that a lot of these typically fall within the children's and middle grade realm. There are a couple of books in here that are adult, not so much YA, because Booktube within itself tends to be, or has traditionally been, a heavy YA area. So there's still books that we don't talk about enough, but there's just one or two titles on here, I think. Maybe just, yeah, 2 titles. But we're going to go ahead and jump into this video. It's not too long. All right, so the first one that we have on this list is Frindle. Now, a lot of you have probably heard about this one before. This is an old school one that I think just does not get the credit that it deserves. I actually want to go back and read a lot more of Andrew Clement's books because I just really grew up on these books, really enjoyed them. But Frindle, of course, is one of the most popular and actually one of my most favorite books. Frindle focuses on a young boy who learns where words come from, how words are designed, where they get their meaning. And so he decides to create this revolutionary idea where he no longer wants to call a pen, he decides to call it a frindle. And so he starts calling it a frindle. His classmates do, then other people in the school do, then people in the neighborhood do. And then all of a sudden, you know, administration is in an uproar because they're like, you know, you must stop calling a pen a frindle. And it's out of his control at that point because pretty much everyone across the country starts calling a pen a frindle. And so it really discusses the power of language and also this idea of challenging authority as a child. And I love that. I love that. I think a lot of times we tell kids not to question authority, and I think that in some cases that can be rather dangerous, to not question authority, to not ask those necessary questions to figure out, like, why is this done the way that it's done? Why should kids not be inquisitive? Why should they not ask questions? And so one of my favorites of all time, absolutely love it. Definitely had to include it on this list. Next one that I have is another one that I think quite a few people have read, but I wish just got a little bit more buzz, and that is essentially like the whole Track series by Jason Reynolds. But I'm going to particularly go with Ghost, which is the first one in the series, which follows a young kid by the name of Ghost who is writing from a lot. This book is very complicated in the terms of Ghost is a very complex character who's going through a lot of stuff throughout the entirety of this book. So he actually ends up running track, but that's not really his sport. That's not what he does. He loves playing basketball, and he challenges someone on a track to race, and he wins. And so the Olympic gold medaling coach kind of sees that he's a good runner, and he decides to kind of take him under wing and put him on the track team. And you learn so much about Ghost and his home life and how that continuously impacts him and what it's done to him as a young kid. And I mean, it's Jason Reynolds, so you can't really go wrong, to be honest with you. You can't. You just can't go wrong. The next one on this list should not be a surprise because I talk about this one all the time, and I think a lot of people talk about this author, but this book in particular is one that I wish was getting more love. I don't know if it got a lot of love when it originally came out, but I try to recommend this one as much as possible because of the fact that it is truly something that captures what exactly is happening in the United States right now with the opioid epidemic, and that is Heroin by Mindy McGinnis. Y'all, this book is, first of all, it's not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of content warnings with this one because we are following a main character who ends up injuring her leg in a car accident. She plays softball, but she ends up getting prescribed, I believe, Oxy for the injury. And at first it just starts off as her taking it as for pain medication, and then eventually she develops a need for the Oxy. She becomes dependent upon it, and then the Oxy turns into a heroin addiction, and then we just kind of go downhill from there. And this is not one of those books where it's happy sunshine, everything is tied up perfectly at the end of the book. This is one that, like, we see our character hit rock bottom and she stays rock bottom, and we do see her, you know, start to begin the recovery process. But this is probably one of those realistic fiction books in YA that just, I can't let go of it, because it's a book that haunts me and I constantly think about this book. So I wish that more people were reading this one. I know that a couple of people have picked it up based on my recommendation, but my goodness gracious, y'all, like, one of the best top tier YA realistic fiction books that I've ever read in my lifetime, and I've read a lot of YA. The next one that I have is a middle grade science fiction series, which middle grade science fiction is getting a little bit better in terms of like the amount that we're seeing. Same thing with YA. YA has always been kind of like about science fiction and not really marketing it very well. Same thing with middle grade. There's middle grade science fiction out there, but I wish there was a little bit more. Masterminds was one of those series that I found that I really ended up enjoying, by Gordon Corman, whose backlist I really need to dive more into. Masterminds follows these groups. It's a group of kids who live in this town called Serenity, and everything's perfect in Serenity, and we follow a main character who's never left Serenity, and he bikes to like the edge of the town, and then something weird happens, and then you find out that there's this connection between some of the greatest criminals in history and then also this crime-free area of Serenity. And that's all I can really tell you about it without spoiling it. But these kids learn that they literally can't trust anybody, like absolutely nobody, not a single soul, not even their parents. One of the best middle grade science fiction trilogies ever to be created. Granted, I haven't read a lot, but if I had to say, like, if I was instantaneously having to wreck middle grade science fiction, I automatically go to Masterminds by Gordon Corman, because it is chef's kiss. The next one that I'm going to talk about is one that I actually listed as one of my favorites for the year. So we're going to talk about it again because I really want more people to pick up this book, and that's Refugee by Alan Gratz. So as I just said, if you watch my favorite books of 2022, which I'll link up in the card symbol above if you haven't had the chance to check that out, I talked about this one in great detail. Alan Gratz is somebody that I know does well in the library community amongst kids. I know that his fan base is huge. His books rarely ever stay on the shelf. They circulate very well. But I had never read an Alan Gratz book until I picked up Refugee last year. And it has left an impression on me. So the book itself follows three different perspectives. One from a young girl who's escaping Cuba from Fidel Castro in I think 94. Then we have the perspective of a young boy who is Jewish living in Nazi Germany during World War II. And then we have a young boy who is fleeing Syria in 2015. And so we're following these three perspectives and learning about how each one of these kids and their families are becoming refugees. And I thought that the storylines were just very straightforward in terms of, like, we were getting their backstory, getting what was happening, very emotional, a lot of violence on page, which I was not anticipating, but I think that Alan Gratz handles it in a way that is definitely age appropriate. Like, it's not something that's like, oh my gosh, would I ever give this to a middle grade reader? I would. I think it's great for them to see the perspectives of what other children outside of their own experience have gone through, but the interweaving of the storylines tore me to shreds, okay? And I just need other people in this community to read this book and to see what I'm seeing and to feel what I have felt, because I just can't be alone anymore in reading this book. So if you're interested in historical fiction and you like middle grade, please read Refugee. Just read it for me, please. Please read it. The next one that I have on this list is Conversations in Black, which is edited by Ed Gordon. This is one that I have talked about a little bit on this channel. I know that I did a review of this 2 years ago now, almost 3 years ago now, actually, because I think I did this review in 2020 where I was reading several books about the Black experience and then did a standalone review. And so Conversations in Black was one of these. I recommend this one because this book is the epitome of understanding how no community, particularly the Black community, is not a monolith. I think that sometimes when people are looking at social justice and they're looking at systemic racism and they're looking at just the sociology of what exactly is happening in this country at this moment, there's this tendency to lean into the idea that all Black people think the same. And we do not whatsoever. And what this book does is it deconstructs that idea that Black people are a monolith, that we all feel and think the same way, because it takes different topics that have impacted the Black community and they tap into some of the biggest voices in the Black community, whether that be in entertainment or politics or activism or whatever, and they're each giving their perspective, and the perspectives are conflicting in a lot of different ways. Like even talking about, like, you know, what did the Obama administration mean? And a lot of people think that all Black people feel the same way about the Obama administration, and I'll be the first one to tell you right now, we all do not feel the same way about that. Just no community will feel the same way about everything. Even if that one event is impacting everyone, how people respond to it is not going to be exactly the same. And so this was one that I just clung to for the longest time and still think about from time to time because of the fact that it just reiterates that idea. So if you're into nonfiction, you're into sociology or politics to some degree, I definitely would recommend checking that one out. Another one that I have that is just fascinating that I talked about in my review of, or my video where I said, oh, I read 5 books about the Trump administration. Here's what I learned. It's Midnight in Washington by Adam Schiff. I've read quite a bit of political nonfiction at this point. I have found that I rather enjoy political nonfiction, whether it is just kind of like a survey or it's coming from directly from the politician. I am currently working my way through Tim Scott's book, which I never thought that I would read Tim Scott's book, but here we are in 2023 and I am learning some very interesting things. So it was natural that I was going to pick up Midnight in Washington because Adam Schiff has a very unique perspective of what it was like being in Washington during the Trump administration. And this book, y'all, was just very well written. First of all, I listened to it on audiobook. It's rather large. It's 500 plus pages. I think the exact numbers maybe 512. Don't know why I remember that at all, but I do know that it's over 500 pages. And Adam Schiff details not only like what was happening during the Trump administration, but we get into some details about his personal life and how he got into politics. We learn a lot about what he was doing during the impeachment trials, and when the second set of impeachment trials happened, you know, what was going on in terms of his involvement, his response. We learn a lot about his personal feelings in response to insurrection. And so it just was very well done. I enjoy Bob Woodward's entire Trump trilogy. I enjoy Bob Woodward's writing, but this one had more of a personal touch to it that I didn't think I was necessarily going to get, but really loved and enjoyed. And so if you're interested in reading a political nonfiction that I think is well developed and interesting, and in some places very fun and responsive to everything that has happened in the past few years, I definitely would check out Midnight in Washington. So the next one that I'm going to recommend is one that I believe came out at the top of 2021, if I'm not mistaken, and it is The Awakening of Malcolm X, and this is by Tiffany D. Jackson and Ilyasah Shabazz, and which is Malcolm X's daughter. And so this is the second book technically in the Malcolm series. I believe the first one is Betty Before X, which is about her mother. That was the first one. And so she's kind of pairing up with different writers to tell the story of her parents. I don't know how many books there are technically in the series just yet, but either way, this is a book that I enjoyed so much, and I think as of even today it still has like under 1,000 ratings on Goodreads. It focuses on Malcolm X's time in prison, and the awakening aspect of it is him coming into his identity of who he feels like he's meant to be. This is also the period where we get to see him slowly make his way into the Nation of Islam. It is a lot of commentary on the experiences of Black men and white men who are incarcerated. I think that there were a lot of quotable moments, and I will say, just as a reference here, because both of them do point it out, there are some aspects of this where the two took creative liberties, meaning that they were filling in holes of the narrative that they may not have had access to in terms of what actually happened. So just be aware of this, that it's not technically a nonfiction book. I think that it is more so a reimagining of what his experience would have been like, with actual events taken into consideration through the creation of the book, with of course some added information in. I really did enjoy it. I think that this was really well done. I am always interested in learning more about Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam, and so whenever I see that they are creating these books for a younger audience, I usually get really excited. Like Betty Before X is a middle grade book, and this one is a YA book. But if you are interested in Malcolm X, or if you are just curious about just the social commentary of this one, I highly recommend it. Of course, you know me, I had to include a picture book on this list, because why would I not include a picture book? So the only picture book that I do have on this list is Ruby's Reunion Day Dinner. Now, I picked this up, and I don't even think I talked about it that much. I did review it on Goodreads, but I don't remember like really in-depth reviewing it. This focuses on young Ruby, who is really adamant about making her own reunion day signature dish. So everyone who's coming to the reunion has a signature dish except Ruby, and we follow her as she tries to put the pieces and parts together of what she's going to make that's going to be her signature dish. The descriptions on this in terms of the food, y'all, are absolutely mouth-watering. I do not recommend reading this picture book on an empty stomach. I think the artwork was exquisite. I think that yes, it is a description of dishes and food, but at its core, it definitely is about family. It's one of those picture books that kind of sticks with you and is very fun and lighthearted and just enjoyable. So if you're into picture books, you like food, you like family, this is one that I would go for. So the last one that I have on my list is a translated book that I read in 2021 from India, and it's called Gachi Gachi. And this one is difficult to talk about because it really is one of those books that doesn't really click for a reader until the very end of the book. Okay, so basically we open up in this book where is a narrator that is at a coffee shop, and he's kind of narrating everything that is around him, or he's describing everything that's around him. It switches to more of a familial and character study, how this family goes from acquiring or having nothing to acquiring massive wealth, and they become so consumed in the wealth that they don't even see the changes that are happening in the family. And it's fascinating because you as a reader can see just the decaying of the familial relationships, the marriages, like everything just seemingly falling apart. But they can't see it because they're so knee deep. And it isn't until our narrator switches from the guy that we had in the beginning to his wife that we realize how detrimental everything does become. And so that's kind of like, it's a short book, but that's basically like the only summary that I can really give you of the book. But I do want to read you a quote from the book that I think, even in my review that I wrote a couple years ago, I felt like described perfectly. It describes perfectly what the hell happens, and it ties everything together. And it's not a spoiler, it's just, it's not we who control money, it's the money that controls us. When there's only a little, it behaves meekly. When it grows, it becomes brash, and it has its way with us. I think that this was just a very fascinating look at Indian culture. It was a very fascinating look at characters. It's definitely a character study, and the family dynamics had me just suckered in from the beginning to the end. So I definitely recommend picking this one up as well. All right, y'all, so those are 10 books that I think deserve a little bit more love from Booktube. If there are books that you think deserve a little bit more love, let me know in the comment box below. As always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications. If you're looking for ways to support the channel, all the links will be down in the description box below, and I'll be back with another video soon.